Charlotte's ranch is on the verge of ruin when a mysterious Native American named Caleb offers to help. But Caleb isn't just a simple man, he's the heir to a powerful tribe with vast riches. As they grow closer, their bond sparks danger, and what happens next will change their lives and Hope Valley forever. Hey there. Thanks for being here. Leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you think of the story. Let's keep going. The Arizona wind carried dust and broken promises across Hope Valley Ranch. Charlotte Miller held the bank letter with trembling hands, the words foreclosure notice dancing before her eyes like cruel mirages in the desert. 30 days, she whispered to the emptiness surrounding her. The ranch that she and James had built with so much love now watched her in accusing silence. The sagging fences, the main house roof leaking after the last storm, the barn threatening to collapse at any moment. Everything bore witness to her solitary struggle against time and adversity. Charlotte crumpled the letter and threw it onto the dusty ground. At 28, she had lost everything. Her husband in an accident 2 years ago, the ranch's prosperity, and now, apparently, even hope itself. The sky began to darken on the western horizon, promising another storm. She looked at the heavy clouds gathering and felt a strange resignation. Perhaps it was time to accept defeat, but as she turned to enter the house, something caught her attention. A solitary figure walked along the dusty road toward the ranch gate. A tall man with dark hair, carrying only a small backpack on his shoulders. Charlotte frowned. Visitors were rare at Hope Valley, especially at dusk. The man stopped at the gate and watched her in silence. Charlotte wiped her hands on her worn apron and walked slowly toward the gate. The stranger remained motionless, his dark eyes taking in the deteriorated state of the ranch without judgment. As she drew closer, she noticed his weathered face bore the distinctive features of a Native American, and his clothes, though simple, were clean and well-maintained. "Ma'am," he said, tipping an imaginary hat. His voice was deep and respectful. "Can I help you?" Charlotte's voice carried a wariness born from months of dealing with creditors and unwelcome visitors. The man gestured toward the damaged roof of the main house, where blue tarps flapped in the evening breeze like surrender flags. "I noticed your roof needs repair. I'm handy with construction work." Charlotte's laugh came out bitter. "Mister, I appreciate the offer, but I can barely afford to feed myself, let alone pay for labor. I wasn't asking for money." The simple statement caught her off guard. She studied his face, searching for hidden motives or the cruel jest she'd grown accustomed to from the townspeople. Instead, she found only quiet sincerity. "Then what do you want?" "Food and a place to sleep while I work. Nothing more." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Charlotte looked up at the darkening sky, then back at the stranger. The practical part of her mind screamed warnings about letting a strange man onto her property, especially one whose presence would surely raise eyebrows in town. But the desperate part of her, the part that had been drowning slowly for 2 years, whispered something different. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb." "Caleb what?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching the storm clouds gather. "Just Caleb." The rain began in earnest now, and Charlotte felt the familiar panic of knowing her roof couldn't handle another serious storm. The leak in the kitchen had already ruined half her remaining supplies. "Last month, you really know how to fix roofs." Among other things, Charlotte hesitated, her hand gripping the gate latch. She thought about Daniel Roberts, the most powerful rancher in the area, and his well-known hatred for Native Americans. She thought about the townspeople's whispers that already followed her. Wherever she went, she thought about the 30 days. The bank had given her another flash of lightning illuminated Caleb's patient face, and Charlotte made her decision. "The barn's dry," she said, opening the gate. "You can sleep there. I'll have breakfast ready at sunrise." Caleb nodded once and stepped through the gate. As he passed her, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, not desperation like her own, but a deep sadness that seemed older than his years. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller, Charlotte Miller. Thank you, Mrs. Miller, as they hurried toward the barn through the increasing rain. Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a decision that would change everything. Whether for better or worse, only time would tell. The storm unleashed its full fury just as they reached shelter, and Charlotte found herself standing in the barn doorway beside a stranger. Both of them watching the rain wash over Hope Valley Ranch like a baptism. Charlotte woke before sunrise to the sound of hammering. For a moment, disoriented in the gray pre-dawn light, she wondered if she had dreamed the encounter with the stranger. But as consciousness fully returned, she realized the rhythmic sound was coming from her roof. She pulled on her boots and stepped outside to find Caleb already at work, moving with sure-footed confidence across the damaged shingles. In the early morning light, she could see he had somehow acquired materials, wooden planks, nails, and what appeared to be proper roofing materials. "Where did you get all that?" she called up to him. Caleb paused in his work and looked down at her. "Found some usable wood in your old shed. The rest," he gestured vaguely, "I have my ways." Charlotte frowned. She hadn't given him permission to go through her property. But as she watched him work with practiced efficiency, her irritation faded. Each movement was deliberate, skilled. This wasn't the desperate fumbling of someone pretending to know construction. This was expertise. "Coffee's ready," she called. "Be down in a minute," true to his word. Caleb climbed down shortly after, wiping sawdust from his hands on a cloth. Up close, Charlotte noticed details she'd missed in the storm-darkened evening. The small scars on his hands that spoke of years of manual labor, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon as if watching for something, and the quiet dignity in his posture that seemed at odds with his simple clothes. She poured him coffee in her second-best cup. The good china had been sold months ago. "You're up early." "Always am." He accepted the coffee gratefully. "Storm did more damage than I thought. But it's fixable. How much will it cost?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, betraying her constant worry about money. "I told you, just food and shelter." Charlotte studied his face over her own steaming cup. "Nobody works for free. What's your real reason for being here?" Caleb was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. Sometimes a person just needs to feel useful again. The raw honesty in his words caught her off guard. She recognized the sentiment, the slow erosion of purpose that came with loss, the desperate need to matter to someone, to make a difference somewhere. "The townspeople won't like seeing you here," she said quietly. "I figured as much. Daniel Roberts especially. He owns most of the land around here." And she paused, unsure how to explain Daniel's hatred without sounding like she shared it. "He doesn't like Indians." Caleb finished matter-of-factly. Charlotte nodded, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "It's not right, but you're worried about what he might do." Caleb set down his cup. "I understand. If my being here puts you in danger, I'll move on." The offer was made simply, without resentment, which somehow made it worse. Charlotte thought about the roof above their heads, already showing signs of improvement after just a few hours of work. She thought about the 30 days until foreclosure. She thought about the long months of struggling alone. "No," she said firmly. "You offered to help, and I accepted. This is my ranch, at least for now. I decide who stays and who goes." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I make terrible pancakes." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I'll take my chances." As Charlotte moved to prepare breakfast, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: companionship. Not the pitying sympathy of neighbors or the calculating interest of creditors, but the simple presence of another person sharing her space, her morning, her small acts of survival. Outside, the sun crested the eastern hills, painting Hope Valley Ranch in shades of gold and possibility. By midday, Charlotte had to admit her pancakes were indeed terrible, But Caleb had eaten them without complaint. She watched from the kitchen window as he worked on the roof, marveling at his methodical approach. He wasn't just patching holes. He was reinforcing weak spots she hadn't even noticed, creating drainage channels, and somehow making the whole structure look more solid than it had in years. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her observations. 3 riders approached the ranch, and Charlotte's stomach dropped as she recognized the lead horse, a magnificent black stallion that belonged to Daniel Roberts. She stepped onto the porch as Daniel dismounted, flanked by his 2 ranch hands, Tom and Buck. Daniel was an imposing man in his 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that held no warmth. His expensive boots and tailored shirt spoke of wealth that had only grown since his wife's death 5 years prior. Charlotte, Daniel's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Heard you've got yourself a visitor. Above them, the hammering stopped. Charlotte could feel Caleb's presence on the roof, though she didn't look up. News travels fast. It does when it's the wrong kind of news. Daniel's eyes narrowed as they swept the ranch. Tom, here, was passing by yesterday evening. Saw you talking to some drifter at your gate. This is my property, Daniel. I can talk to whoever I choose. Not when it's one of them. The venom in his voice made Charlotte flinch. I won't have savages camping on neighboring land. It's not safe for decent folks. The word savage hung in the air like a slap. Charlotte felt anger rise in her chest. Not just at the slur, but at the assumption that she couldn't make her own decisions. His name is Caleb, and he's fixing my roof, she said steadily. I don't care if his name is Jesus Christ himself, Daniel snapped. I want him gone, today. And if I refuse, Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Then, you'll find yourself with more problems than just a leaky roof. You're isolated out here, Charlotte. Accidents happen to people who make poor choices. The threat was clear, and Charlotte felt her resolve waver. She thought of the nights she lay awake, listening to every sound, jumping at shadows, vulnerable and alone. But then she remembered Caleb's quiet dignity, his skilled hands bringing her ranch back to life, his simple request for nothing more than food and shelter. I appreciate your concern, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. But I can take care of myself. Daniel's face flushed red. You're making a mistake, Charlotte. A big one, maybe. But it's my mistake to make. The standoff stretched between them, tense and charged. Daniel's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, and his men shifted nervously in their saddles. Finally, he stepped back. 3 days, he said coldly. I'm giving you 3 days to come to your senses and send him packing. After that, he left the thread unfinished, mounting his horse with angry, jerky movements. As the 3 riders galloped away, Charlotte remained on the porch, her heart pounding. Only when the dust settled did she hear soft footsteps behind her. Caleb had climbed down from the roof and now stood quietly at the corner of the house. How much of that did you hear? She asked without turning around. Enough. His voice was calm, unruffled. I can leave if you want, no shame in it. Charlotte finally turned to face him. His expression held no judgment, no anger at Daniel's words, only patient understanding. It occurred to her that he'd probably faced such hatred before, many times. Do you want to leave? Caleb looked up at the roof, then back at her. Roof's not finished yet. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. No, he said finally. I don't want to leave. Then you'll stay, if you'll have me. Charlotte felt something settle in her chest, a determination she hadn't felt since James died. 3 days, he said. Think you can finish the roof in 3 days? For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb smiled, really smiled. It transformed his whole face, making him look years younger. Mrs. Miller, he said, I think I can do better than that. The next morning, Charlotte discovered that Caleb's promise hadn't been idle boasting. She woke to find him already at work, but not just on the roof. He had somehow repaired the sagging front porch steps, reinforced the barn door that had been hanging crooked for months, and was now examining the ranch's old windmill with the focused attention of an engineer. "How did you?" she began, then stopped herself. She was learning that Caleb's capabilities seemed to extend far beyond basic carpentry, water pumps not drawing properly, he said without looking up from the windmill's base. "Mechanisms clogged, but the structure's sound. Give me another day, and you'll have better water pressure than you've had in years." Charlotte stared at him. "You know about water pumps too?" Among other things, he repeated his phrase from the day before, but this time she caught the hint of amusement in his voice. As the day progressed, Charlotte found herself constantly surprised. Caleb moved through tasks with an efficiency that spoke of extensive knowledge, not just the rough skills of a drifter, but the refined expertise of someone who had been well trained. When he fixed the kitchen window that had been stuck for months, she noticed his technique was precise, almost methodical. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked over lunch. Caleb chewed thoughtfully before answering. "My father believed a man should know how to build, repair, and maintain anything he might need to survive. Was he a carpenter?" Among other things. Again that phrase. But this time, Charlotte detected something deeper. Pride, perhaps, and a touch of sadness. That afternoon, while Caleb worked on the windmill, Charlotte attempted to tackle the ranch's bookkeeping. The numbers were as discouraging as ever. Even if she sold everything she had left, she'd still be short of what the bank demanded. She was so absorbed in her calculations that she didn't notice Caleb had approached until he spoke. "May I?" He gestured toward the ledger. Charlotte hesitated. Financial matters felt private, shameful even. But something in his quiet manner made her slide the book toward him. Caleb studied the figures for several minutes, his finger tracing columns with the same methodical attention he'd given the windmill. Finally, he looked up. "These numbers assume you're operating alone." "I am operating alone. Not anymore." He turned the ledger around and pointed to several entries. "You're thinking too small. This land could support twice the livestock you had before, if properly managed. The water rights alone are worth more than you're calculating." Charlotte blinked at him. How could you possibly know about water rights? Instead of answering directly, Caleb stood and walked to the window facing west. "See that ridge line? The way the land slopes toward the creek. This property sits on one of the best natural watershed areas in the territory. With the right improvements, you could supply water to 3 neighboring ranches. The right improvements would cost more money than I'll ever have." "Not necessarily." Caleb returned to the table, his manner thoughtful. "Sometimes the most valuable resources are the ones hiding in plain sight." Before Charlotte could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. This time, it was just one rider, Tom, one of Daniel's men. He stayed in his saddle, looking nervous. "Ma'am," he called to Charlotte, "Mr. Roberts sent me to check if you'd reconsidered his suggestion." Charlotte stepped onto the porch, Caleb beside her. "You can tell Mr. Roberts that my answer hasn't changed." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "He's not going to like that, ma'am. He's been talking to the sheriff about vagrancy issues." "This man isn't a vagrant. He's working for me." "Yes, ma'am." But Tom's eyes flicked to Caleb. "Mr. Roberts has a lot of influence in town. Might be easier for everyone if Tom." Caleb's voice was quiet but carried an unexpected authority. "Tell your boss that some things are worth more than his influence." The ranch hand's eyes widened slightly, as if something in Caleb's tone had surprised him. After a moment's hesitation, he tipped his hat and rode away. Charlotte turned to study Caleb's profile. "You're not just a drifter, are you?" Caleb watched Tom's figure disappear over the ridge before answering. "No, Mrs. Miller. I'm not." "Then who are you?" Caleb met her eyes, and for a moment she saw something vast and complicated in his expression. Responsibility, burden, and a kind of careful hope. "Someone who's been looking for a reason to stop running," he said quietly. That evening, Charlotte found herself studying Caleb across the dinner table with new eyes. The man who sat before her bore little resemblance to the humble drifter who had appeared at her gate 3 days ago. There was something regal in the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that spoke of leadership rather than desperation. "The roof's finished," he announced simply. Charlotte looked out, surprised. "Already? And the windmill? You'll have good water pressure by morning?" She set down her fork. "Caleb, I need to know who you really are." He was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly in his hands. When he finally looked up, his dark eyes held a weight that made her breath catch. "My given name is Caleb Strongheart. The son of Samuel Strongheart, chief of the Apache nation in this territory." Charlotte felt the words settle over her like a physical weight. "You're the heir to leadership of one of the most powerful tribes in Arizona." "Yes." His voice remained steady, matter of fact. "I've been away from my people for 3 years, trying to find a path between the old ways and the new world we're all being forced to accept." "Why are you here? Why my ranch?" Caleb stood and walked to the window, his silhouette stark against the dying light. "I was scouting the area, evaluating possibilities for peace negotiations with the territorial government. Your ranch sits on land that was once part of our traditional hunting grounds." Charlotte's heart hammered. "Are you here to claim it?" "No." He turned back to her. "I came to understand the people who live here now, to see if coexistence might be possible." What I found was a woman fighting to save something she loves, facing the same kind of displacement my people have endured for generations. "So you decided to help me out of what?" "Sympathy. At first, maybe." Caleb returned to the table, his expression earnest. "But it became more than that. Watching you stand up to Daniel Roberts yesterday, seeing your courage in the face of his threats, you reminded me why some things are worth fighting for." Charlotte struggled to process this revelation. "Your father, Samuel Strongheart, does he know where you are?" "He knows I'm alive." Beyond that, Caleb shrugged. "I've disappointed him many times. My wandering, my doubts about traditional ways, my belief that we must find common ground with settlers rather than constant warfare. And now I think I've found what I was looking for." His eyes met hers across the table. "A place where the different worlds might actually work together instead of destroying each other." The weight of his words settled between them. Charlotte realized that everything she thought she knew about her situation had just changed completely. This wasn't just about a drifter helping with repairs. This was about the son of a tribal chief choosing to make his stand on her failing ranch. "Daniel Roberts will never accept this," she said quietly. "Daniel Roberts doesn't have a choice. The territorial government has been trying to establish formal peace treaties with my father's nation for 2 years. Samuel Strongheart holds legal claim to mineral and water rights throughout this entire region." Charlotte's eyes widened. Including this land. Caleb's voice carried a quiet certainty. "Your ranch sits above one of the richest silver deposits in the territory. The water rights alone are worth more than Daniel Roberts' entire operation." The implications hit her like lightning. "You could take it all, yes, but you won't." Caleb leaned forward slightly. "Not if I can find a better way. A way that proves my father's vision of cooperation isn't just a dream." Outside, the first stars appeared in the Arizona sky, and Charlotte felt her world shifting beneath her feet. Like desert sand in the wind, Charlotte barely slept at night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw silver veins running beneath her failing ranch. Water rights that could change everything, and the quiet certainty in Caleb's dark eyes. By dawn, she had made her decision. She found him already working, this time reinforcing the barn's foundation with a precision that now made perfect sense. "Caleb." He looked up from his work. "You've been thinking all night." She took a deep breath. "If what you say is true about the silver, about the water rights, why haven't you claimed it? Why work to save my ranch instead of just taking what's legally yours?" Caleb set down his tools and stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Because taking it would prove every terrible thing men like Daniel Roberts believe about my people." That were savages who understand only force and theft. And helping me proves what? That there's another way. That Apache wisdom and settler determination can build something stronger than either could create alone. Before Charlotte could respond, the thunder of approaching horses filled the morning air. But this wasn't Daniel Roberts' small group. This was an entire cavalry of riders raising dust clouds on the horizon. How many? Caleb asked, his voice suddenly sharp with alertness. 20, maybe more. They watched in tense silence as the riders approached. Daniel Roberts led the group, but behind him rode men Charlotte didn't recognize, hard-faced strangers. With a look of hired guns, at the rear, she spotted Sheriff Morrison. Looking deeply uncomfortable, the group stopped at her gate, and Daniel dismounted with theatrical authority. Charlotte Miller, his voice carried across the yard, by the authority of the territorial sheriff. I'm here to remove a trespasser from your property. Sheriff Morrison remained mounted, his face grim. Ma'am, I've received complaints about a vagrant causing disturbances. I'm afraid I'll need to ask your guest to move along. Charlotte stepped forward, Caleb beside her. This man is working for me. He's not trespassing. Working. Daniel's laugh was harsh. You can't afford to pay anyone, Charlotte. We all know that. Payment doesn't always involve money, she replied steadily. One of the strangers spat into the dirt. Heard she's been harboring an Indian. That true? The word hung in the air like a threat. Charlotte felt Caleb tense beside her, but his voice remained calm when he spoke. I'm Caleb Strongheart. Several of the men shifted in their saddles at the name. Daniel's face went white, then flushed red with rage. Strongheart, he repeated, his voice thick with hatred. Your people killed my son. The war claimed many sons. Caleb replied quietly. On both sides. Don't you dare. Daniel's hand moved toward his gun, but Sheriff Morrison quickly intervened. That's enough, the sheriff said sharply. Daniel, this isn't what we agreed. What we agreed, Daniel snarled, was to remove the threat from decent people's land. The only threat I see, Charlotte said, surprised by her own boldness, is 20 armed men threatening to people on their own property. Sheriff Morrison looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Miller, perhaps it would be easier if your friend just moved on, for everyone's safety. No. The simple word surprised even Charlotte herself, but looking at Caleb, at the quiet dignity he maintained even facing this armed mob, she felt something crystallize inside her. This is my land. These are my guests, and unless you have a warrant, Sheriff, I suggest you all move along. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Daniel's face contorted with fury, and his hand again moved toward his weapon. 3 days are up, Charlotte, he said through gritted teeth. You made your choice. The tension stretched unbearably as Daniel's hand hovered near his gun. Charlotte could feel her heart pounding, but she held her ground, acutely aware of Caleb's steady presence. Beside her, Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat loudly. Daniel, I won't be party to violence on a woman's property without just cause. Just cause. Daniel's voice cracked with emotion. That savage's people butchered my boy, my brother. Half my ranch hands. They burned out 3 homesteads last spring. That wasn't my people, Caleb said quietly. Those were rogue bands acting without tribal authority. All the same to me. Then you're a fool. The words came out harder than Caleb had intended, and several men reached for their weapons. Caleb, Charlotte warned softly. But something had shifted in Caleb's demeanor. The humble worker was gone, replaced by something Charlotte hadn't seen before, authority. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of command. You want to know who I am? Daniel Roberts. I'm the son of Samuel Strongheart, negotiator for the Apache Nation. For 3 years, I've traveled this territory trying to prevent the very bloodshed you seem eager to start. I don't care if you're the son of Geronimo himself. You should care. Caleb stepped forward, and several horses shied nervously. Because tomorrow, my father arrives with a delegation to finalize water rights agreements with the territorial government. This land, he gestured around the ranch, sits at the center of those negotiations. Daniel's face went ashen. You're lying? Sheriff Morrison knows I'm not, don't you, Sheriff? All eyes turned to the lawman, who looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. After a long moment, he nodded reluctantly. Territorial governor's been expecting the Apache delegation. Big doings in Phoenix, which means, Caleb continued, his gaze fixed on Daniel, that any violence against me or Mrs. Miller will be seen as an act of aggression. Against official peace negotiations, the hired guns began looking uncertain, glancing between Daniel and each other. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. Threatening a widow was one thing, but interfering with territorial politics was another entirely. Daniel's face twisted with rage and frustration. You think hiding behind treaties will protect you? I think, Caleb replied evenly. That 20 armed men threatening to unarm people shows exactly why these treaties are necessary. Sheriff Morrison shifted in his saddle. Daniel, we should go. This has gotten out of hand. No. Daniel's voice was low. Dangerous. I've buried too many good people because of his kind. I won't let them take root here. Charlotte found her voice. The only person threatening anyone here is you, Daniel. Caleb has done nothing but repair my property and treat me with respect. Respect. Daniel laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it when a savage moves in with a decent woman? The insult hit Charlotte like a physical blow. But before she could respond, Caleb moved. Not toward Daniel, but away, stepping back and placing himself clearly in a non-threatening position. Mrs. Miller has shown me hospitality, he said, carefully. Nothing more, nothing less. Any man who suggests otherwise dishonors her. The dignity in his response somehow made Daniel's crude insinuation seem even uglier by comparison. Charlotte saw several of the men look uncomfortable, and even Sheriff Morrison frowned with disapproval. This isn't over, Daniel said finally. Mounting his horse, treaties or no treaties, I won't have you on neighboring land. Then you'll have to take that up with the territorial government, Caleb replied, and my father. As the group rode away, Charlotte felt her knees go weak. Only when the dust settled did she realize she'd been holding her breath. The next morning arrived with an unusual stillness, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Charlotte stood at her kitchen window, watching the eastern horizon where dust clouds had been visible since dawn. Caleb had been unusually quiet during breakfast, his attention constantly drawn to those approaching riders. How many? She asked. 12. My father doesn't travel with large parties. When he comes in peace, Caleb's voice carried a tension she'd never heard before. Charlotte, there are things you should know before they arrive. She turned from the window to face him. What things? My father is not like me. He hasn't spent years among settlers, learning your ways. He judges quickly and trusts slowly. Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. He'll see your kindness to me as either weakness or calculation. And which do you think it is? The question seemed to surprise him. Neither. I think it's strength. The sound of approaching horses grew louder through the window. Charlotte could see the riders clearly now. Native Americans on painted horses, moving with the fluid grace of people who had been born to the saddle. At their head rode a man whose bearing proclaimed leadership even at a distance. That's him, Caleb said quietly. Samuel Stronghart. Charlotte felt her mouth go dry. She had agreed to help one man repair her roof. Now she was about to meet the most powerful Apache chief in the territory. The rider stopped at her gate with military precision. Samuel Stronghart dismounted with the fluid grace of a much younger man. Though Charlotte could see gray threading through his long black hair, he was taller than Caleb. With the same dark eyes but none of his son's gentleness, this was a man, accustomed to command, to respect, to getting his way. Caleb walked out to meet his father, Charlotte following a few steps behind. The two men faced each other in silence for a long moment before Samuel spoke in rapid Apache. Caleb responded in the same language, his tone respectful but firm. Samuel's eyes moved to Charlotte. studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. When he finally spoke in English, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "You are Charlotte Miller." "Yes, sir. You have given shelter to my son." It wasn't a question. But Charlotte nodded anyway. "I have." Samuel continued his examination of her, then shifted his gaze to take in the ranch. The repaired roof, the functioning windmill, the reinforced structures. "He has worked for you." "With me," Charlotte corrected gently. "We've worked together." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or interest. He turned back to Caleb and spoke again in Apache. This time their conversation was longer, more intense. Charlotte caught the occasional word she recognized, but most of it was lost to her. Finally, Samuel addressed her again. "My son tells me you stood against 20 armed men to protect him." "I stood for what was right, even knowing the danger to yourself." Charlotte thought of Daniel Roberts' threats, the loaded guns, the very real possibility of violence. "Yes." Samuel studied her for another long moment, then did something unexpected. He smiled. It transformed his entire face, revealing the same warmth she sometimes glimpsed in Caleb's expressions. "Then perhaps," he said, "we should talk about the future of this land." Behind him, his men dismounted and began setting up what looked like a temporary camp. Charlotte realized this wasn't going to be a brief visit. That afternoon, Charlotte found herself sitting at her own kitchen table feeling like a stranger in her own home. Samuel's strong heart occupied the space with the quiet authority of a man, accustomed to being the center of important conversations. Maps were spread across the table, detailed surveys of the territory that Charlotte had never seen before. "Your husband purchased this land 5 years ago," Samuel said, his finger tracing the boundaries of Hope Valley Ranch. "Did he know what lay beneath it?" "Beneath it?" Charlotte looked at Caleb, who nodded encouragingly. Samuel reached into a leather pouch and withdrew something that made Charlotte's breath catch. A chunk of raw silverware, veined with white metal that gleamed even in the dim kitchen light. "This came from the creek that runs along your eastern boundary," Samuel explained. "James Miller was a careful man. He tested the water, examined the soil, studied the rock formations. He knew." Charlotte stared at the silver in her hands. "James never said anything about minerals. He was waiting," Caleb said gently, "waiting for the right time, the right circumstances. He filed mining claims with the territorial office, but he never acted on them." Samuel nodded. "Smart man. He understood that silver brings attention, and attention brings trouble." "How much trouble?" Charlotte asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew. "Daniel Roberts has been buying up land around yours for 2 years," Samuel replied. "Small parcels, homesteads whose owners couldn't make their payments. He owns everything, from here to the mountain ridge except your ranch." Charlotte felt the pieces clicking together. "He knows about the silver, he suspects, but he can't act without legal claim to the land." Samuel's dark eyes met hers. "That's why he's been so eager to see you fail." The weight of this revelation settled over Charlotte. Like a heavy blanket, everything made sense now. Daniel's seemingly excessive interest in her financial troubles, his fury at Caleb's presence, his willingness to bring armed men to force the issue. "How much silver are we talking about?" she asked quietly. Samuel and Caleb exchanged glances. "Enough to make you one of the wealthiest women in the territory," Caleb said. If properly managed," Samuel repeated, emphasizing the qualification. "Silver mining requires capital, equipment, workers. It also requires legal protection. Apache treaty rights supersede territorial mining claims." Charlotte looked up sharply. "You're saying you could stop any mining operation?" "I'm saying my people have legitimate claims to mineral rights throughout this region. Claims that predate any settler agreements." Samuel leaned back in his chair. "But I'm also saying that cooperation serves everyone better than conflict." "What kind of cooperation?" Samuel smiled, the same expression that had surprised her earlier. warm and genuinely pleased, the kind my son has been advocating for years. Partnership instead of conquest. Caleb leaned forward. A joint venture, Charlotte. Your legal ownership of the surface land, combined with Apache mineral rights and tribal labor. Equal partnership, equal profits. And Daniel Roberts, Samuel's smile grew sharper. Finds himself with a great deal of worthless grazing land surrounding the richest silver mine in Arizona. Charlotte set the carefully on the table, her mind spinning with possibilities. Yesterday she had been 30 days from losing everything. Now she was being offered partnership in what could be a fortune beyond her wildest dreams. There's one condition, Samuel added quietly. Charlotte tensed. Which is, my son must claim his rightful place as my heir. He must return to lead our people. The silence that followed was profound. Charlotte looked at Caleb, seeing the conflict written clearly across his face. Caleb's silence stretched until it became painful. Charlotte watched his face, seeing the war between duty and desire playing out in his dark eyes. Samuel waited with the patience of a man who had negotiated countless treaties, understanding that some decisions couldn't be rushed. Father, Caleb finally said, his voice carefully controlled, I need time to consider, time we may not have. Samuel's tone grew urgent. Daniel Roberts isn't the only threat. The territorial government grows impatient with Apache autonomy. If I don't have a strong successor ready to take my place, they'll use our internal uncertainty against us. Charlotte felt the weight of unspoken implications. What happens if Caleb doesn't return? Then this partnership becomes impossible. Without tribal leadership, we cannot guarantee the mineral rights. Without the mineral rights, your ranch remains worthless land with expensive holes in the ground. The brutal practicality of it hit Charlotte like cold water. Everything depended on Caleb's choice, and that choice would tear him away from the life he was building here. There must be another way, she said quietly. Samuel shook his head. Leadership cannot be delegated, Mrs. Miller. My people need someone they trust, someone who understands both our traditions and this changing world. Caleb is the only one who can bridge both worlds. A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Charlotte could see dust clouds approaching, riders moving fast. Samuel's men were already moving into defensive positions, their relaxed demeanor replaced by alert readiness. Daniel Roberts, Charlotte said, recognizing the lead horse. But this time Daniel wasn't alone. Behind him rode at least 30 men, and these weren't just ranch hands and hired guns. Charlotte spotted several men in territorial militia uniforms. Samuel stood smoothly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. It seems your neighbor has decided to force the issue. Caleb moved to the window, his jaw tight with tension. He's brought territorial authority with him. Military backing. Can he do that? Charlotte asked. If he's convinced them we're a threat to territorial security, yes. Samuel's voice remained calm, but Charlotte could see the steel underneath. Caleb, gather our men. We may need to know. Caleb's voice cut across his father's words. No more violence. That's exactly what he wants. Proof that Apache presence means danger. Then what do you suggest? Samuel asked. Caleb looked at Charlotte, then back at his father. I suggest we give him exactly what he doesn't expect. Before either could ask what he meant, Caleb walked outside. Charlotte and Samuel followed, emerging to find Daniel's expanded force arrayed before the ranch gate like a small army. Caleb's strong heart, Daniel called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. By authority of the territorial militia, you're under arrest for trespassing on private property and inciting civil unrest. A militiaman Charlotte didn't recognize rode forward. Sir, you need to come with us. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force. Caleb stepped forward, his hands visible and empty. I surrender myself to territorial authority. Caleb, no. Charlotte started forward, but Samuel's hand on her arm stopped her. Wait. The chief said quietly, watch your son. Caleb continued, walking toward the gate, his pace steady and deliberate. When he reached Daniel, he stopped, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. I am Caleb Strongheart, son of Samuel Strongheart, negotiator for the Apache Nation. I submit to arrest under territorial law, and I formally request that the territorial governor be notified of my detention. The militia officer looked uncertain. Sir, I don't think you arrest the official representative of a sovereign nation, Caleb continued. You create a diplomatic incident. Are you prepared for those consequences? Daniel's face went white with rage, but the militia officer was clearly having second thoughts. The militia officer looked increasingly uncomfortable as the implications of Caleb's words sank in. Around him, the other soldiers shifted nervously in their saddles, clearly having second thoughts about what they'd been told was a simple arrest of a vagrant. Daniel's voice cracked with desperation. He's stalling. He's just an Indian drifter causing trouble, actually. A new voice interrupted from behind the assembled riders. He's exactly who he says he is. Everyone turned to see a lone rider approaching at a steady pace. The man wore the distinctive uniform of a territorial messenger, and his horse bore the official seal of the governor's office. The messenger rode directly to the militia officer, Captain Morrison. I have urgent orders from Governor Phillips. Daniel's face went ashen. What orders? The messenger ignored Daniel entirely, addressing only the military officer. Sir, you are to provide full escort and protection to Samuel Strongheart and his delegation. The governor is expecting them in Phoenix tomorrow for formal treaty negotiations. The captain took the official papers, scanning them quickly. His expression grew more troubled with each line. These orders are dated 3 days ago. Yes, sir. The governor has been waiting for Chief Strongheart's arrival. Any interference with the Apache delegation is to be considered an act against territorial policy. Charlotte felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. Daniel Roberts looked like a cornered animal, his eyes wild with rage and desperation. I don't care about treaties or negotiations. Daniel snarled. That savage's people killed my family. Samuel stepped forward, his dignity intact despite the hostile crowd. Mr. Roberts, perhaps it's time you learned the whole truth about your son's death. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. What, 3 years ago? A rogue band attacked your eastern pastures. They wore Apache war paint, yes, but they were not Apache. Samuel's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. They were Comanche raiders, using our symbols to misdirect blame. That's impossible. Your son died bravely defending his men from Comanche raiders who wanted you to believe Apache were responsible. Samuel pulled a leather pouch from his belt. He was carrying this when we found his body. Samuel held up a silver locket, clearly a personal item, engraved with Daniel's family crest. Daniel stared at the locket as if seeing a ghost. Where? How did you? We tracked the real killers to 100 miles south. We found their camp, and we found your son's belongings. Samuel's voice softened slightly. We also found 3 other families' possessions. The Comanche wanted to start a war between Apache and settlers. Your hatred has served their purpose perfectly. The revelation struck the assembled group like lightning. Daniel reached for the locket with trembling hands, his face crumbling as the weight of 3 years of misdirected rage hit him. We tried to return his belongings to you, Samuel continued. You refused to see our messengers. Charlotte watched Daniel's world collapse around him. The man who had terrorized her for days, who had brought armed men to her ranch, suddenly looked old and broken. My boy. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Die protecting others, Samuel said firmly. He would not be proud of what you've done in his name. The captain cleared his throat loudly. Sir, we need to escort the Apache delegation to Phoenix immediately. These are direct orders from the governor. Daniel looked around at the armed men he'd gathered, at Charlotte standing beside the Apache chief, at the locket in his shaking hands. For a moment, Charlotte thought he might collapse entirely. Instead, he turned his horse and rode away without another word, his men following in confused silence. As the dust settled from Daniel's retreat, an unusual quiet fell over Hope Valley Ranch. The territorial messenger had departed with confirmation that the Apache delegation would arrive in Phoenix. As scheduled, Samuel's men began preparing for travel, their movements efficient and purposeful. Charlotte found herself standing beside Caleb, both of them watching the preparations in silence. The weight of unspoken words hung between them like storm clouds. "You have to go," she said finally. "Yes," his voice was barely above a whisper. "Your people need you." "They do." Caleb turned to face her, his dark eyes filled with pain. "But I need you." The simple admission hung in the air between them. Charlotte felt her heart breaking and mending simultaneously, understanding for the first time that love could be both the most wonderful and the most terrible thing in the world. "Caleb," she began, but he held up his hand. "Let me say this before I lose my courage." He took her hands in his callous palms warm against her skin. "These past days with you have shown me what peace looks like, not the absence of war, but the presence of something worth building, worth protecting." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "Then why does it feel like we're saying goodbye?" "Because duty and desire don't always align." His thumb traced across her knuckles. "My father is right. My people need leadership for the challenges ahead. Without strong guidance, they'll face the same fate as tribes across the West. And if you stay," Caleb's smile was heartbreakingly sad, "if I stay, I save my own happiness while failing everyone who depends on me. I become a man who chose love over responsibility." Charlotte pulled her hands free and stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "So that's it? We work together. We trust each other. She couldn't finish the sentence. "We find something beautiful and precious, and then we honor it by doing what's right instead of what's easy," Caleb finished gently. Samuel's voice interrupted them. "Son, we need to leave within the hour." Charlotte looked past Caleb to where the Apache chief stood, his weathered face showing understanding and perhaps regret. "Chief Strongheart," she called. Samuel approached, his expression grave. "Mrs. Miller, this partnership you proposed, what happens to it now?" "The mineral rights remain Apache property, but without Caleb here to oversee operations, and without trust between our peoples," he shrugged, "perhaps in time, another opportunity will arise." "What if there was another way?" Charlotte's voice grew stronger as an idea formed. "What if the partnership didn't require Caleb to choose between duty and personal happiness?" Both men looked at her with interest. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "What do you propose?" Charlotte took a deep breath, her mind racing. Hope Valley Ranch becomes more than a mining operation. It becomes a bridge between two worlds. A place where Apache and settlers can work together, trade together, learn from each other. "Go on," Samuel said carefully. "Caleb leads your people, but he leads them into a new kind of relationship with settlers. Not conquest, not surrender, but partnership." Hope Valley becomes the model for what's possible when both sides choose cooperation over conflict. Caleb stared at her. "You're talking about something that's never been tried before." "Exactly." Charlotte's excitement grew. "Your father said you understand both worlds. Use the knowledge. Show everyone that Apache wisdom and settler determination can build something neither could achieve alone." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his sharp eyes studying Charlotte's face. "This would require you to accept a very different life than you planned, Mrs. Miller." "I lost the life I planned when James died," Charlotte replied steadily. "But maybe I can help build something even better." 1 year later, Charlotte stood on the porch of Hope Valley Ranch, watching the sunrise paint the Arizona sky in shades of gold and copper. The ranch bore little resemblance to the failing property she had nearly lost to foreclosure. The main house had been expanded to accommodate meetings between Apache leaders and territorial officials. The barn now housed equipment for the silver mine that had transformed the entire region's economy. Most remarkably, the bunkhouse that had once sheltered only Caleb now provided temporary lodging for Apache families and settler homesteaders working together on joint ventures. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention to the eastern trail. Caleb rode toward the ranch at the head of a small group, 2 Apache men, 3 settler families, and a territorial official she recognized as one of Governor Phillips' advisors. These monthly meetings had become routine, as Hope Valley Ranch served as the neutral ground where 2 worlds continued learning to work as one. Caleb dismounted and walked toward her with the easy confidence of a man who had found his purpose. The uncertainty that had marked his face a year ago was gone, replaced by the quiet authority of someone who had successfully bridged cultures without losing his identity in either. "How did the negotiations in Tucson go?" Charlotte asked, accepting his gentle kiss. "Better than expected. 3 more ranches want to join the cooperative. The territorial government is finally seeing that partnership is more profitable than conflict." Charlotte smiled. The cooperative model they had pioneered at Hope Valley, where Apache mineral and water rights, combined with settler agricultural knowledge, was spreading throughout Arizona territory. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save her failing ranch had become a blueprint for a new kind of relationship between peoples who had been enemies for generations. "Your father's pleased enough to suggest expanding operations into New Mexico territory." Caleb grinned. "He says if we're going to revolutionize the Southwest, we might as well do it properly." Samuel Strongheart emerged from the main house, his presence still commanding but tempered now by satisfaction with his son's leadership. Over the past year, Charlotte had come to understand that beneath the stern exterior lay a man of profound vision who had been waiting decades for someone capable of implementing his dreams of peaceful coexistence. "Mrs. Miller," Samuel nodded respectfully. In private, he had begun calling her daughter. But public formality remained important for diplomatic purposes. "Chief Strongheart." Charlotte returned his greeting with equal respect. "Will you be staying for the community feast tonight?" "Wouldn't miss it." 3 Apache families and the settler families are announcing permanent partnership agreements. These celebrations matter. As if summoned by their conversation, people began emerging from various buildings around the ranch. Children ran between Apache and settler families with the easy acceptance of the young. Adults discussed crop rotation techniques, mining schedules, and shared water management with the practical focus of people whose livelihoods depended on cooperation. Charlotte watched it all with a sense of wonder that had never quite faded. The bank foreclosure notice that had once represented her complete failure now hung framed in her kitchen as a reminder of how dramatically life could change when people chose hope over fear. "Mrs. Miller," one of the Apache women called, "the bread ovens are ready, coming." Charlotte called back, then turned to Caleb, "Ready to feed 50 people. With you?" "Always." As the sun reached its zenith over Hope Valley Ranch, Charlotte felt the profound satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. She had saved her ranch, but more importantly, she had helped build a bridge between worlds that would endure long after she was gone. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next story.